Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe. That is Kieran Maguire, the Price of Football podcast host and football finance expert. We've got you on again because, as always, over the last 11 months at least, there is this ongoing what's happening with the ownership at Manchester United, and it looks as though for maybe the first time in a while, we've actually got some answers rather than just some questions. But first of all, Kieran, how are you doing?
I'm still celebrating Brighton's first ever victory in Europe in Amsterdam. It was that good, I can't remember anything of the last 3 days.
That's absolutely fantastic. That's just what we want to hear. Obviously, victories in Europe are something that United are struggling to come by at the minute, so we might have to move away from that. But if we just get straight into the sort of the takeover stuff, so a few sort of get our ground in first. We're seeing supposedly over this international break is a likely time for Manchester United to announce their deal with Jim Ratcliffe to take over 25% of the club. Now, when do you expect this deal to be done? Is there anything that you think is sort of crucial about this few weeks, or do you just think it so happens to be here? Is there any sort of financial basis why they would want to get it done now?
I think the financial basis is that we've got a transfer window commencing on the 1st of January, and wheels are already in motion at most clubs. You've identified targets. I think it's fairly common knowledge that Manchester United were at the upper end of their financial fair play limit as far as the most recent window was concerned. And part of the reason for that is that under the rules, you're only allowed to lose £15 million in the Premier League over 3 years, but the owner can put in a further 90. Now, as I think all Manchester United fans are aware, that the Glazer family have chosen to not invest in terms of new shares, putting in money themselves into the club. And this means that Manchester United is at a disadvantage compared to those clubs that can. If, as part of this new arrangement with Jim Ratcliffe, he will be buying partly shares from existing shareholders, but partly investing fresh funds into Manchester United. Having that deal completed by the 31st of December would increase the budget in January.
Okay, well that's interesting. Very exciting, first of all. So would that be 90 million then potentially? Obviously that would have to be agreed on first, but would the maximum there be potentially up to 90 million? Is that what you're saying?
For financial fair play purposes, yes. Now, given that the price that's being discussed in the media is 1.3 billion, he doesn't actually have to buy many. Manchester United doesn't have to issue that many more shares for him to make that particular contribution. Where the rest of the money is going to end up, I think that has been part of the reason why we've not had white smoke coming out of Old Trafford over the course of the past couple of weeks, given that he now appears to be the only bidder in town, because it will have been discussed at board level. There has to be some consideration for the other shareholders, the other people that have invested. I think the likes of Lindsay Train, who own, I think they own about a double digits percentage of the shares that are traded in New York. Some of their managers have expressed reservations about where they're going to be left. So the lawyers will be involved, the accountants will be involved to make sure that the Glazers or Manchester United are not on the receiving end of a lawsuit if this deal goes through.
So just looking at, obviously I want to get into a bit more depth on the shares and stuff in a little bit, but just before that, this sort of 25%, me looking as someone who a very limited knowledge of how businesses work, certainly on this scale I have almost no knowledge. Is it common for, we're hearing rumours of Jim Ratcliffe taking over or being a main part of the new sporting side of things and maybe bringing in a new team and this, that and the other. Is it common for a minority, and it is a minority, obviously, 25%, for someone with that limited amount of shares and ownership to take such control? And if it isn't, do you think that this could be a sort of the Glazers saying he's got control when really, when it comes down to it, he has to do and everyone else has to do what the Glazers say?
It's not something that I've seen before. I think all of the focus, however, has been on the 25%.
Yeah.
What is likely to be happening at the same time is that there will be a contract which will allow Sir Jim Ratcliffe to appoint the equivalent of a director of football, to have involvement in the setting of the budget, to be involved, for his team to be involved, and in fact probably have the final decision when it comes to the key issues of retention and recruitment. Right. So he buys 25% of the shares, but at the same time, there's a parallel contract which will say that the Glazers no longer have to give their approval to signing player X or player Y. Now, it looks like there's going to be sort of a triumvirate of Jim Ratcliffe, Brailsford, and one of the Glazers as far as that decision-making is concerned. And ultimately, I think Dave Brailsford will have a lot of say with regards to taking perhaps a different strategy with regards to player recruitment at Manchester United, one which is perhaps more in common with what we're seeing at the likes of Manchester City and Liverpool and Brighton and so on, Brentford, very much data-driven as opposed to perhaps being coach-driven or scout-driven.
It feels like we need, this a little bit of a revamp, and the idea that someone coming. I always think of it like, if you think of the sort of owner of Manchester United as a job rather than a title, of course he would have the ability to hire and sack people below him, like Richard Arnold has some of that power now, and John Murtaugh has some of that power now. If you think, is that almost a better way of thinking of it, rather than everyone sort of fighting for control all the time? You sort of bringing Jim Ratcliffe in to do this job, which is sort out the structure, and being at the top of that pyramid would mean he would have control over those sort of below him in that pyramid. Is that a good way of thinking of it, or is that sort of muddling things a little bit? Because I think a lot of people think, well, how can he have any control because he ain't got 51%? And I think a lot of people get stuck on that of Sheikh Jassim wanted 100%, Jim Ratcliffe's only getting 25 for now, so he must, he's essentially a Glazer pawn. Do you think that's slightly wide of the mark, or would you be concerned as well as a United fan?
I think it is perhaps slightly wide of the mark, because all of the focus has been on the proportion of shares being acquired, whereas ultimately it's the rights that Sir Jim is going to inherit as a result of becoming this 25% shareholder. It also, to a certain extent, gives him a degree of power, because I need to excuse my language here, but the technical phrase I would use is it means that he can now be a cock blocker, in the sense that if somebody else tries to come in, if you own 25% of the shares, that probably will give him a power of veto over somebody else over the course of the next 2 years. Now, it could be that, as well as owning 25% now, there will be a series of agreements along the lines of he will be given the opportunity to buy X% in year X, and that will be linked, the price he will pay will be linked to the performance and the degree of success that Manchester United has had since he made his first effective controlling decisions. And in terms of this discussion about what he is in charge of, the commercial side of the business, which has been spectacularly successful, and I know people don't like saying anything nice about the Glazers, but that has been the focus of the business, and it has been successful. There's no doubt about it. I think that's going to be left to them. So therefore, he won't be having any involvement in terms of who's in charge of sponsorship deals, commercial partners, and so on.
So just on that, then, I'll jump forward slightly. There's been rumours of Jean Claude-Blanc, a name that's been mentioned in terms of a potential new CEO, and obviously he was in charge of that sort of stuff at PSG. He was I don't remember his exact title, but essentially sort of head of business marketing, and he, doing the Jordan deal and other deals with big brands that have taken PSG from being the 7th or 8th biggest team in France to being one of the biggest brands in the world. Do you know much about that? Do you think that seems likely? Does Jean Claude-Blanc, who works for INEOS now, so you would think that deal would be relatively easy to get done. However, he has had a focus in the past on that side of things. Do you think the Glazers will be keen to stop that happening?
I think if the Glazers think that he can do a better job, then they'll make that decision. Now, I think one of the criticisms that could be levelled at the Glazers is that historically, their decision making in terms of setting the culture of the club hasn't been particularly successful since Sir Alex retired, and they might feel that replacing an accountant from PricewaterhouseCoopers and Bristol University with an accountant from PricewaterhouseCoopers and Bristol University, with what we had in terms of Ed Woodward to Richard Arnold, wasn't going to change the culture that much. And you're much closer to the club than I am in terms, of course, being a fan, and you see things at the ground level that I won't. I just look at numbers, and I think therefore a potential change, it would be symbolic in terms of this is clearly Sir Jim Ratcliffe influencing, and therefore that could actually result in pushback from the Glazers, who might want to be seen to be still in charge of certain aspects of the club.
Do you fancy some free beers this Christmas? It is Beer 52's award season, and they are showcasing some of the best beers from across the world. And here in this package, you can get 8 exclusive beers that you will not find anywhere else free this Christmas. All you have to do is go to beer52.com/paddock and cover just £5.95 postage to get your free case of 8 beers now. I love Beer 52, and they offer the ultimate immersive beer drinking experience, and this month is an absolute cracker as they celebrate some of the greatest talents in the global craft beer movement. You've got craft beer giants Omnipollo with their Pale Ale Outer Galactic, which offers a smooth and vibrant hoppy profile, which is going to make sure that you keep coming back for more. Look at the colour on that. Lovely and light. Perfect. Let's have a little go. Oh, spectacular. Spain's Basque have developed a fantastic reputation for brewing exceptional dark beers as well, and their Baltic Porter, The Adventures of Mr. Malta, you're not going to forget that name anytime soon, has got a fantastic blend of aromas. You've got roasted malt sweetness, you've got dark chocolate, you've got coffee, and you've got some dark fruit undertones as well. It's got a subtle balance of alcohol warmth and a bitterness that adds complexity and balance to every sip. And if you don't like dark beers, that's absolutely fine. Choose the light only box and you will get a couple of free tasty snacks as well, of course. You can also learn about all of the fantastic breweries, all of the fantastic beers included in this case in the Ferment magazine, which is right in the box. And even if after all of that, the beers, the snacks, the magazine, everything, you're still not satisfied, you can simply cancel or pause at any time. So make sure you go to beer52.com/paddock. The link is in the description. Go and check them out now. That is beer52.com/paddock. On with the show. In terms of further down the pyramid then, obviously there's been more mention of Paul Mitchell and other people coming in as well at Manchester United. Do you see again the ability to do this? Do you think that the Glazers will almost look at it as actually Jim Ratcliffe, who's got more experience of owning or sort of success with sporting teams, or certainly a good amount of success. I know they've had the Buccaneers as well be successful. That bringing him in could actually take some of the pressure off the Glazers, turn it onto Ratcliffe and say, go on then, you fix the footballing side of things, and if you don't, for once, actually, we might not get as much stick as usual. Do you think they're almost, again, this is another thing you see, where they're kind of looking to make Ratcliffe the scapegoat for what is, predicted to be more years of lack of success at United?
I think you've absolutely nailed it there. To a certain extent, the Glazers are the biggest winners of this. If Sir Jim comes in and transforms Manchester United and the club starts winning Premier League, Champions League trophies, in line with expectations of fans and given the size of the club, where you'd expect it to be, then he'll take some of the glory, but they'll take the cash. And the Glazers are far more interested in cash than glory. If it doesn't work out, the Glazers will say, well, this is evidence that we weren't the problem in the first place, so what are you all moaning about? You can see it from their point of view. They're getting over a billion sterling as an opening fee, as a sort of an introduction fee from Sir Jim, and they let him play, which he's now effectively playing a glorified game of FIFA, in the sense that he gets to choose this, that, and the other in respect of running the club, and the Glazers still have influence.
Just a couple of things on the actual finances and the money of this then. So the 1.3 billion or 1.25 billion or whatever it's going to be, is there any suggestion or any, you know, I don't know if the word law would be the right thing, but obviously United are in loads of debt. The owners of Manchester United are about to make a load of money from a purchase of the same club. Is there any necessity for them to put that to helping the debt be relieved? Is there any suggestion that they'll put it back into the club, or is it just simply from Jim Ratcliffe's pocket to the Glazer family pocket?
It's a private transaction between two individuals. It's got nothing to do with Manchester United. I own some shares in Vodafone. If I sell them to somebody else, Vodafone gets nothing. It's exactly the same here. Because the shares are traded on the New York Stock Exchange, and also because there's a private involvement as well, it's not actually connected to the football club. It's only is if part of the deal, Manchester United also issues a fresh number of shares that the club can financially benefit.
It's just, they've come out of this so well, haven't they, the Glazers? Put no money of their own in, took little bits out here and there, and then only have to sell what is going to be less than 25% of their shares because some of it's going to the other shareholders. So a small amount of their shares, and they get £1 billion for it. And they have to do nothing in terms of actually supporting Manchester United. On the actual supporting of things, we've heard this, not from Jim Ratcliffe himself, but presumably through his people, this supposed pledge of around £245 million into redevelopment and investment into the club. Like you said there, maybe some of that could go into transfers, but obviously a large majority of it, if not all of it, will have to go into other things. What can that money be spent on? What can't it be spent on for FFP-wise? And what do you expect it to be spent on?
Well, all infrastructure expenditure is exempt from FFP calculations. Right. Okay. So, we've all read Cristiano Ronaldo's comments about the state of the training facilities, although I think they weren't necessarily spot on. You and I, we've both been to Old Trafford. Yeah. It's not a 21st century stadium anymore. No, it probably never was. But because the Glazers were banking upon the success of Super League and Project Big Picture, both of which would have had central funds, which would have then handed out grants to individual clubs, they were hoping to be benefactors from that, especially given that their close involvement with both of those particular activities. Those sources of money have dried up. They don't particularly want to borrow more money because borrowing's become a lot more expensive over the course of the last year or two. So getting money in from Sir Jim. Now, whether this money will be in the form of a loan and therefore it could involve charging interest, or it could be interest-free, we'll have to wait and see.
Just on another thing that a lot of people sort of talk about, and is this kind of Class A, Class B share thing that no one really understands, although Class B have 10 times the voting rights of Class A or something to that degree. The way you're talking about this deal, it's almost like, is this outside of that? Is this a potential of, a portion of the Class B shares are being given over, or is the control that Jim Ratcliffe's getting almost, it almost doesn't matter in terms of a boardroom voting level, or because this contract is for almost the ability to do X, Y, and Z rather than how strong he is in the boardroom. So I don't know what I'm talking about, but can you kind of explain what the expectation is for whether it's going to be a Class B or Class A or a mixture, and what that means in terms of the actual control Jim Ratcliffe will have?
But for those people not familiar, the Glazer family owns 69% of all of the shares of Manchester United. There's about 160 million shares, and the Glazers own just under 115 million, something like that.
Okay.
But every share that is owned by the Glazers, which are these Class B, they carry 10 votes. And Avram and Joel Glazer, I think, have both sold some of their shares before. But there's a rule that if they sell their Class B shares to people outside of the Glazer family, they instantly become Class A shares, and they go from carrying 10 votes each to 1 vote each. So if they are selling their shares to Jim Ratcliffe, I suspect he will end up with Class A shares, but I wouldn't worry too much about that, because the focus should be on what else is he getting. It's not the number of shares, it's this separate legal document which will give him the ability to have a final say in decisions relating to, and there'll be a list. It'll be a very, very strictly defined list as to where he has ultimately the power of veto or approval. And from what we're hearing, there's lots of selective leaking to selective journalists, from what we're hearing, is that would be on the football operational side of the club.
See, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Because I think as people like me or some other United fans, where we kind of have a bit of a grasp of things, but like I didn't know, for instance, that you can almost circumnavigate the voting rights of the shares by just writing up a contract that says you are allowed to do this, this, and this within Manchester United. So the voting right almost doesn't matter because these things won't be going through the board that kind of makes more sense to me now, because I was thinking, how is he going to get this? So just as a separate point then, so theoretically, could the Glazers own only 11% of Manchester United shares, but if all of them are B shares, they could still have voting control of Manchester United? Is that a possible situation?
Yes, yeah, there is a definitive limit, but you're absolutely right, Joe. And this is because sort of 10 to 15 years ago, you had companies such as Google and Facebook where they were tech stocks, where they wanted to be listed on the stock exchange, but the likes of Mark Zuckerberg and co wanted to retain control of the key decisions. And the stock market was willing to accept it. Part of the reason why Manchester United is listed in New York as opposed to being listed in London, Zane, is because New York's more sort of amenable to that type of thing, whereas in Europe we go, if you want to get lots of money from the stock exchange, you've got to be prepared to give up a few more of your rights.
Yeah, because that sounds so dodgy to me. Like, oh, I own a company, I want to make loads of money by selling shares. Here's the share price, but just so you know as well, those shares are worth 10 times less than my shares. That sounds like a complete farce and a complete mockery of the idea of shares in the first place. Like, is that how does that allow to
but
go?
they're not worth 10 times less because they tend to pay out the same level of dividend.
Okay,
But if I own 1,000 shares in Manchester United or 1,000 shares in Facebook or 1,000 shares in BMW, ultimately they're worthless. They carry no power because there's millions and millions of shares. It's only really at the upper end of having significant share numbers that it really makes a difference. The Glazers realised that what they could do is they could sell off £100 million worth of shares, and their control of Manchester United in terms of voting rights would have dropped from 96% to 95.5%. So that's what they've done historically over the years. And in New York, they're quite happy to accept that.
Wow. I mean, I suppose it works. The more rich you are, the more of these things open up to you, I suppose, like you said. Just moving on, just finally to this sort of the actual kind of business of this going forward. So let's assume there's a situation in place where Jim Ratcliffe could potentially take over more control, and even if there isn't, this footballing control looks to be certainly partly, if not entirely, owned by Jim Ratcliffe and Dave Brailsford and maybe Joe Glazer thrown in there as well. Just on INEOS and again, just reservations that some people have. Is INEOS a big enough company? Is their revenue stable enough and of the size where we need to worry as United fans? Can INEOS support Manchester United sort of medium to long term, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's
good.
Football's a much smaller business than people realise. Manchester United's revenue, 620 million pounds, 640 million pounds, whatever it is this year, is tiny. You've got, I know individual retail stores that can make 9 million, 10 million pounds a day in London, and they do that for 360 days a year. So football is actually a small industry with an awfully big media footprint. We've just seen Microsoft buy one of the big gaming companies, and it's bought it for 70 billion. Manchester United's going for a tenth of that, and that generates 1,000 times more media comment.
Is it Activision that they've just bought?
That's right.
Yeah, that's a good point actually. But in the grand scheme of things, football has got a much bigger following and fan base than it does make money, almost, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's okay. So that's good. So they financially, there's no worries about whether INEOS are big enough to own Manchester United.
No worries at all. Yeah.
In terms of his other investments, there's stuff at the Mercedes F1 team, Nice. We saw what he did with Team INEOS now and Team Sky before that in the Tour de France. Do you think that Jim Ratcliffe has got the credentials to own Manchester United? Do you think that, from a business perspective and a sort of cultural perspective? Do you think that this is a good angle for Manchester United to be taking?
I think it will split the Manchester United fan base to extent, but not a hard split. I don't think the fans will be turning against each other as we've seen in respect of some clubs. He's quite high profile in terms of his political views, in terms of his enthusiasm for fracking and things like that. So it might upset some. Manchester United's always as a sort of a solid left-wing fan base as far as Manchester itself is concerned. I appreciate that on a more global scale that might not be the case. So therefore that might result in some reservations. He's got his Manchester credentials, but he had a season ticket at Chelsea and 18 months ago was trying to buy Chelsea. Would a Manchester United fan even think about that? So I think there will be a degree of scepticism, and there will be a degree of cynicism, but win a couple of trophies and that all disappears. Yeah,
and I think there's also this thing of, if we start to see elements of improvement and change, remembering how bad it has been over the last 18 years and how little, like you've mentioned yourself, how little the Glazers care about success on the pitch compared to sort of financial success off the pitch. I think that will hopefully change. And I'm someone that tries to remain positive and optimistic about these things. And ideally, the Glazers would be gone, and Jim Ratcliffe or whoever would own the entire control of Manchester United. But if we can get certain things improved, then that is better than we were 12 months ago. So I'm trying to remain positive. Right, thank you very much. So just to recap. Potential extra funds in January, which is good news. Redevelopment of certain parts of Manchester United, which is good news. INEOS are big enough to not have to take dividends out of Manchester United, hopefully, if they choose not to. And we might be getting a revamp of the footballing side of things. That sounds like 4 or 5 good things to me.
That sounds like Christmas. Sounds like Christmas
to me, indeed. Yeah, exactly. Almost as good as Brighton in Ajax the other night for you. Although by the sound of it, maybe not quite as good. Right, thank you very much for joining us, Kieran. Make sure you check out the Price of Football podcast. Put a link to that in the description so you can check out all of that. And you cover everything, don't you, on there? Not just Man United, not just Brighton, just football generally. So make sure you go and check that out. And hit subscribe to Stretford Paddock if you haven't already. This has been a one-on-one interview with football finance expert Kieran Maguire. Thanks for watching.